Afternoon, folks. Sorry to interrupt your meal. Can I get a minute?
What's going on, officer? We're just eating.
I understand. We had a call that matches this table. I just need to ask a couple of
About
questions.
what? We haven't done anything.
I'm not saying you have. Just
Officer Vincent Holland believed he was walking into a routine situation. A simple call from a restaurant manager. A report of possible credit card fraud. Nothing urgent. Nothing complicated. But what Holland didn't realize, what he never stopped to question, was that this call would expose something far more dangerous than a fraudulent transaction. It would reveal how quickly authority becomes abuse when bias is allowed to guide a badge. It was a bright, quiet afternoon at Mason Street Bistro, an upscale casual restaurant known for hosting family celebrations and business lunches. Sunlight poured through floor-to-ceiling windows, casting warm reflections across polished wood tables and crisp white linens. Fresh flowers sat in small vases. The low murmur of conversation filled the room. Everything about the space felt calm, normal, safe. At a corner table by the window, a family had gathered for a reason as simple as it was joyful a grandmother's birthday. 3 generations sat together, laughing, sharing stories, passing menus back and forth. A moment meant to be remembered for cake and candles, not sirens and handcuffs. Outside, the midday sun painted the sidewalks bright. Inside, the lunch crowd moved at an easy pace. No one sensed that within minutes, this peaceful restaurant would become the stage for a public humiliation that would shatter a family, cost a city too, sink $1 million, and end a police career forever. Because what happened next had nothing to do with crime, and everything to do with assumption. At the center of that corner table sat Robert Patterson, 62 years old, a retired postal worker who had spent decades delivering mail through heat, rain, and snow. His laughter came easily, the deep lines around his eyes telling stories of a life built on responsibility and quiet pride. Beside him was his wife, Gloria Patterson, Wushijo, a school principal known for her calm authority and warm smile. She adjusted her glasses as she studied the menu, joking about how birthdays were supposed to be celebrated by others, not herself. Across from them sat their son, Anthony Patterson, Sanshisu, a software engineer who had taken the afternoon off work just to be there. Next to him was his wife Michelle, Sancharar, a nurse who spent her days caring for strangers and her evenings caring for her family. Between them sat their children 7-year-old Jasmine and 10-year-old Marcus, coloring on the kids' menu with crayons the hostess had brought over moments earlier. The table was covered with half-eaten appetizers and glasses of water being refilled. Conversations overlapped. Laughter came and went. Plans for dessert were already being debated. Someone teased that Gloria would pretend not to want cake, only to take the biggest slice. This wasn't a wealthy family trying to impress anyone. It wasn't a loud group drawing attention. It was a middle-class black family doing something ordinary, celebrating a birthday together. They had chosen Mason Street Bistro because Gloria had always wanted to try it. A simple wish, a simple afternoon, one that felt safe enough to let their guard down. At Unu Patruzet she shopped a P.M. Nothing was wrong. At Unu Patruzet she oped P.M. The door opened behind them, and everything began to change. Officer Vincent Holland had been wearing a badge for 11 years, long enough to believe he could read situations at a glance, long enough to trust his instincts more than evidence, long enough for those instincts to quietly turn into assumptions. His record would later be examined, line by line, in federal court. 14 complaints of racial profiling over 6 years, none resulting in serious discipline. Some dismissed outright, others reduced to minor reprimands and mandatory training sessions that changed nothing. He'd been told to be more mindful. He'd been sent to diversity training. Twice. but no one had ever truly held him accountable. Over time, Holland learned a dangerous lesson: he could act first and justify later. And each time the system protected him. That belief grew stronger. The call that brought him to Mason Street Bistro had come 20 minutes earlier from the restaurant's manager, Brian Foster. Foster hadn't reported a crime. He'd reported a feeling. Something off about a black family using credit cards that didn't look right to him. That was all it took. When Holland stepped through the restaurant doors, his eyes immediately began scanning the room. Not randomly, purposefully. And when they landed on the Patterson family at the corner table, his expression shifted. His jaw tightened. His shoulders squared. Before he said a word, before he asked a question, he had already decided who was guilty. What Holland didn't know was that his assumptions were about to collide with cameras, witnesses, and a truth that would destroy the story he was so certain of. Holland didn't pause to observe. He didn't ask a single neutral question. He walked straight toward the Patterson family, his boots echoing softly against the restaurant floor, his hand resting on his utility belt, a deliberate gesture meant to establish control before a word was spoken. "Excuse me," he said, his voice firm and loud enough for nearby tables to hear. "I need to see identification from everyone at this table." The laughter stopped. Robert Patterson looked up from his menu, surprised but polite. "I'm sorry. Officer, identification. For what reason?" Holland didn't answer the question. "All of you. Now." Anthony felt the shift immediately, the subtle tightening in the room, the sudden attention of strangers. He rose slowly from his chair, palms open, his voice calm but protective. "Officer, what's going on? We're just having lunch." Holland's eyes locked onto Anthony. "I have a report of stolen credit cards being used here." The words landed hard. Michelle's hand went to her chest. Gloria's smile vanished. Yasmin froze, her crayon hovering over the page. Marcus instinctively reached for his father's arm. "Stolen," Robert said. Disbelief cutting through his composure. "That's not possible. These are our cards. We can show you whatever you need." Holland took a step closer. "Stand up. All of you. Hands where I can see them." Chairs scraped against the floor. Conversations at nearby tables fell into an uneasy silence. Eyes turned. Phones began to rise. In a room that had felt warm and safe just minutes earlier, a single assumption had turned a family celebration into a public accusation. And this was only the beginning. Anthony remained standing, his body tense but controlled. "Officer," he said carefully, "we haven't done anything wrong. If there's an issue, we're happy to clear it up." But Holland didn't hear cooperation. He heard resistance. His voice sharpened. "You telling me how to do my job?" "No," Anthony replied, holding his ground. "I'm telling you there's been a mistake." That was the moment everything shifted. Holland stepped closer, invading Anthony's space. His posture rigid, his jaw clenched. What had started as an accusation now became a test of authority, and in Holland's mind, authority could not be questioned. "I said, stand up," he barked. "Hands where I can see them. Now." Michelle stood, pulling Jasmine close as the little girl began to cry. Marcus's face tightened, confusion giving way to fear. Gloria rose slowly, her hands trembling, the reality of what was happening sinking in all at once. "This is ridiculous," Robert said, his voice steady but strained. "These are our credit cards. You're humiliating us for no reason." Holland didn't respond. Instead, his hand moved to his handcuffs. "Turn around," he ordered Anthony. What Michelle gasped. You're arresting him. For what? I didn't say arrest. Holland snapped. I said detention. To the children. To the family. To everyone watching. The difference didn't matter. Metal cuffs closed around Anthony's wrists. Marcus cried out. Dad Anthony turned his head just enough to meet his son's eyes. It's okay, he said, forcing calm into his voice. It's going to be okay. But even as he said it, the truth was clear to everyone in that room. This was no longer about resolving a misunderstanding. It was about power, and Holland had decided how he intended to use it. The moment the handcuffs clicked shut, the entire restaurant shifted. This was no longer a misunderstanding. It was an injustice unfolding in real time. Phones were raised openly now. Not discreetly. Not secretly. People stood from their tables, their expressions moving from shock to disbelief. A woman at a nearby table stepped forward, her voice steady but firm. Officer, what's your badge number? She asked, holding her phone up. This is unlawful detention. They haven't committed a crime. Holland didn't turn to face her. Ma'am, stay out of this, he snapped. Interfering with police business is a crime. I'm a lawyer, she replied, and you're violating their civil rights. The words hung in the air. Behind Holland stood Officer Luis Mendoza, his partner, body camera recording everything. His face was tight, conflicted. He had seen Holland escalate situations before. He knew this was wrong, but he stayed silent. From behind the hostess stand, Tanya Williams, the assistant manager, watched in disbelief. She had been monitoring the floor, and now she was watching a family being torn apart over nothing. She stepped forward. Officer, Tanya said clearly, professionally, we have security cameras covering the entire dining room. This family has been here since 1230. The same card has been used the whole time, and every transaction matched. For a brief moment, Holland hesitated. Then his pride kicked in. That's not how this works, he said sharply. I'm conducting an investigation. Based on what Tanya asked, a feeling isn't evidence. The restaurant manager appeared from the back, pale and shaken. Officer, maybe we should just check the footage. I might have been wrong. Holland turned on him. You called this in. I'm handling it. The truth was standing right in front of him. Witnesses, cameras, reason. And he chose to ignore all of it. Because backing down would mean admitting the damage he had already done. Holland's grip tightened around Anthony's arm. This was the moment where everything could have stopped. He could have looked at the footage. He could have listened to reason. He could have uncuffed an innocent man. But doing so would have meant admitting he was wrong in front of a room full of witnesses. Take them to the car, Holland ordered. The words landed heavy. Officer Mendoza hesitated. His eyes flicked from Holland to the Patterson family, to the crying children, to the phones recording every second. He knew this wasn't procedure. He knew this wasn't right. But he followed orders. Anthony was guided toward the door, handcuffed, his head held high despite the humiliation. Robert followed behind him, wrists bound, shoulders squared in quiet dignity. He didn't argue. He didn't resist. He didn't want his grandchildren to see anything worse. Michelle collapsed into a chair, pulling Jasmine and Marcus into her arms as they cried openly now. Gloria stood frozen, unable to move, watching her family be led away on her birthday, her hands shaking at her sides. The restaurant was in chaos. Voices rose. People shouted that this was wrong, that this had gone too far, that nothing like this should ever happen. Behind the scenes, Tanya moved quickly. She secured the security footage immediately, making multiple copies. She knew how easily evidence could disappear once police were involved. The attorney who had spoken up uploaded her recording to the cloud, sending copies to colleagues before the video could be questioned or erased. By the time Anthony and Robert were placed into the patrol car, something irreversible had already happened. The story was no longer just about what an officer believed. It was about what the evidence would prove. Within an hour, Anthony and Robert Patterson were sitting in separate interview rooms at the police station. The metal tables were cold. The air was quiet. Very different from the warmth of the restaurant they'd been taken from. Their wallets were emptied, their credit cards examined, their identifications scanned. Every system was checked, every database searched, and every result came back the same. No fraud, no theft, no crime. The detective assigned to the case, Rachel Ortiz, reviewed the file in silence. She watched the body camera footage. She read the incident notes. Then she looked at Holland. "You brought them in for this?" she asked. Her voice flat. "Where's your probable cause?" Holland shifted. Defensive. The manager reported suspicious activity. What activity? Ortiz pressed. Be specific. Holland couldn't answer, because there hadn't been any. Ortiz stood, unlocked the cuffs herself, and turned to Robert and Anthony. "You're free to go," she said quietly. This should never have happened. Robert rubbed his wrists, the red marks already forming. "Who do we talk to about filing a complaint?" Ortiz didn't hesitate. "Internal Affairs. And I strongly suggest you get a lawyer." As Anthony picked up his phone to call Michelle and tell her they were okay, one truth settled heavily over both men. They were free, but nothing about what had happened could simply be undone. The Patterson family didn't just file a complaint. They prepared for a fight. Within days, they hired civil rights attorney Sarah Jennings, the same woman who had stood up in the restaurant and recorded everything. She reviewed the footage once and knew exactly what this was: false arrest, unlawful detention, racial profiling, emotional trauma inflicted in front of children. This wasn't a misunderstanding. It was a civil rights violation. Security footage from Mason Street Bistro became the backbone of the case. It showed the family arriving calmly, ordering food, laughing, celebrating. It showed Officer Holland entering and walking directly toward them without hesitation. It showed the escalation, the handcuffs, the fear on the children's faces. Body camera footage from both officers confirmed it all. Holland's tone, his refusal to listen, his insistence on control even when evidence contradicted him. Witness statements poured in. 53 people who had been in the restaurant that afternoon gave sworn testimony. Among them were community leaders, professionals, and even a retired judge who had watched in disbelief from 2 tables away. When the city's legal team reviewed the evidence, the reality became unavoidable. This wasn't a case they could spin. This wasn't a case they could quietly bury. This was a case they were going to lose. And they knew it. The city moved quickly not to apologize, but to contain the damage. Their first settlement offer came quietly, $500,000. Sarah Jennings rejected it without hesitation. "This isn't about money," she told the mediator. "This is about accountability. Your officer humiliated an innocent family in front of their children. $500,000 doesn't begin to address that." The city raised the offer, $1.2 million. Again, Sarah said no. She laid out the evidence, the footage, the witnesses. Officer Holland's personnel filed 14 prior complaints of racial profiling, ignored and minimized for years. "Take this to trial," she said. "Let a jury see the children crying. Let them hear the tone of that officer's voice. Let them decide what it's worth. The city's legal team ran the numbers. A jury verdict could exceed $10 million. The publicity would be devastating. They came back with a final offer: $2.5 million. Mandatory departmental reforms. Termination of both officers involved. The Patterson family sat together, discussing the offer. The money felt heavy, necessary, but hollow. "It's not just about us," Robert said quietly. "It's about making sure this doesn't happen to someone else." They accepted, not because the price was right, but because the consequences finally were. Officer Vincent Holland was terminated from the department within weeks of the settlement. Internal Affairs reopened his entire career. The 14 complaints that had once been dismissed were no longer treated as coincidences, but as a pattern. Under federal pressure, Holland was charged with deprivation of rights under color of law. Facing overwhelming evidence, he pleaded guilty to avoid prison time. He received probation, mandatory community service, and a permanent ban from law enforcement. Officer Mendoza, who had followed orders instead of his conscience, was also fired. He cooperated with investigators, expressed remorse, and received a lighter sentence, but his badge was gone forever. Inside the department, the damage spread. A police chief resigned. Old cases were reviewed. Convictions tied to Holland were overturned. But for the Patterson family, justice didn't arrive neatly wrapped in legal language. Jasmine began asking questions no 7-year-old should ever have to ask. "Are we bad people? Did Daddy do something wrong?" Marcus became quiet, withdrawn. His grades slipped. He started researching police cases online, trying to understand why following the rules hadn't protected his family. Gloria stopped wanting to go out to eat. Restaurants no longer felt safe. Robert woke up at night, the memory of cold metal cuffs still burning in his wrists. Anthony returned to work, but something in him had shifted. Every police car they passed tightened his jaw. Every explanation to his children cut a little deeper. The settlement had delivered accountability, but healing would take much longer. Healing didn't come all at once. It came slowly, unevenly, with effort. The Patterson family chose not to disappear after the settlement. They chose to speak, to show up, to turn what had been taken from them into something that could protect others. They used part of the settlement to establish the Gloria Patterson Scholarship Fund, supporting young people of color pursuing careers in civil rights, law, and public service. The first recipient was a young woman who had been working as a hostess at the restaurant that day, someone who had witnessed the injustice and decided she wanted to fight it. They supported legal aid organizations, body camera initiatives, community groups helping families who didn't have lawyers, cameras, or witnesses when their rights were violated. 1 year after the incident, Gloria returned to Mason Street Bistro for her 60th birthday. The restaurant was under new ownership now, new policies, new leadership, a deliberate commitment to dignity. They sat at the same corner table by the window. Jasmine colored with crayons again. Marcus showed his grandfather something on his phone. Anthony and Michelle debated the menu. This time, no one stared. No one questioned. No one called the police. It was just a family having dinner. Officer Holland had walked into that restaurant, believing his badge gave him the authority to assume guilt. He walked out having proven the opposite, that authority without accountability is dangerous, and that evidence will eventually expose the truth. This story isn't just about a racist cop. It's about what happens when assumptions go unchallenged, when silence protects abuse, when power is allowed to operate without consequences, and it's about what happens when ordinary people refuse to accept that. Because justice isn't measured only in dollars or discipline. It's measured in whether the harm is prevented from happening again. If you believe evidence should always outweigh assumptions, and that accountability matters more than pride. Subscribe and turn on notifications. Because stories like this don't just expose injustice. They remind us that it can be challenged and changed.